about now?
Alexis Crespo, I can hear it. Okay. Alexis Crespo with RVI representing the applicant. We would like to take one more run at the ADD development scenario baseline to compare our MPD to before we move further with other experts. You heard from Hans Wilson that the 620 slips are an entitlement by the Manatee Protection Plan, that in his professional opinion, there's sufficient water availability, and he can go so far into the bay that those could technically be accommodated. That being said, we could understand your discomfort with that number. We had Ted Treesh take another look at the traffic comparison and just say 250 slips is what Timber's long-term plans on doing. Let's run the pre-scenario at the 250 slips instead of the 620. We feel there's very much potential to do more than the 250 slips, but let's do an apples to apples for the slips so that there's more comfort with our approach in comparing these. So Ted's going to present the trip generation comparison of the pre and post one more time, and I'll just note the significance of the comparison is largely due to the current allowance for public and commercial access to the marina, to the 5 acres. We have conditions in your binder. We'll walk through them today with you that we are very clearly eliminating public access to any commercial or resort uses, and that really is fundamentally why there's such a decrease.
Thank you. Thank you. Ted, just give me a second. I'm making a note here.
Sure. Okay. Ted Treesh, TR Transportation. This table, sorry, I made a mistake. I have 2 table 1s. The bottom table should be labeled table 2. Simply revised the marina trip generation to reflect the 250 slips, as Alexis indicated. So you can see again in the PM peak hour, that reduced the trip generation for the PM peak down to 346 PM peak hour trips. So you can still see the trip generation is still greater under the ADD scenario than what we're currently requesting as the MPD. And as Alexis indicated, the primary reason again is because the marina and the commercial under the ADD are currently open to the public, whereas under the proposed, as indicated in the presentation, those uses will not be open to the public. That's all I have. So.
All right, so the external trips are dropping.
To 346 to 275.
All right, but I'm talking about daily 2-way trips.
Well, again, daily is really not a comparison because under the proposed, ITE does not have a daily trip for the resort land use category.
Okay, I see.
So again, all our analysis that we do for level service on the roadway network is based on PM peak hour.
Focuses on the PM peak.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, Elizabeth Fountain, Chair Evans Engineering, registered professional engineer and certified floodplain manager. So I'm going to just touch, it's really a refresher on all the different coastal flood zones and controlling zones that we have for the South Seas property that dictate the design criteria for new construction and for rebuilding. To help define what those controlling criteria are, we had an exhibit put together that highlights the current project property that's under the MPD and color codes which zone controls the design criteria. So the purple zone is controlled by the FDEP state 100-year storm elevation. So if you remember, that storm elevation sets the minimum elevation for the lowest horizontal structural member for habitable structures. The yellow area is controlled by the coastal A zone, which is the FEMA flood zone that's seaward of the limit of moderate wave action line, the Limwa line. That zone also controls where that lowest horizontal structural member is, and it's 1 foot above the elevation that's depicted on the map. So if it's in the yellow 8, that means the lowest horizontal structural member has to be at 9 to start your habitable space. The light blue or cyan color is controlled by your normal FEMA flood zone, non-coastal, and that dictates where your finished floor starts, and it's 1 foot above that number that's in that zone. So we're highlighting both the north side of the property and the south portions of the MPD property. Just to highlight some key components from my previous presentation, there is a distinction between the SLOSH-defined or NOAA-defined coastal high hazard area and the FEMA-defined coastal high hazard area. The main difference is that, the FEMA-defined one is used in the Florida Building Code regulations and the regulations for constructing in special flood hazard areas to establish those minimum criteria for habitable structures. And that's all in an effort to protect the public as far as safety and welfare. The SLOSH coastal high hazard area is really represents the maximum of maximum. It's the worst case scenario. It's used primarily as an emergency management tool for evaluating emergency plans, preparedness plans, evacuation routes, and it's not used for the Florida Building Code regulations. Again, the FEMA flood hazard areas have been evolving over time. They go through a regular process where the coastal studies are reevaluated, new maps are prepared. The latest version of the maps was effective in November of 2022. And again, these set the minimum criteria for your finished floor elevations. And with the new maps, they established, new coastal zones really related to the limit of moderate wave action. And just to reiterate on that limit of moderate wave action line, it really establishes the boundary for the coastal high hazard area based on FEMA's mapping. And it really defines where those coastal waves, the wave action goes from a more moderate zone to a lesser impactive zone. Again, to highlight the key aspects of the coastal A zone, it requires that you have to elevate your habitable space so that the lowest horizontal member is to at least 1 foot above base flood elevation. And with the latest Land Development Code updates for Lee County, they have included an additional 4 feet of freeboard, is what they call that. That 1 foot is freeboard, so it's an additional 4 feet to acknowledge that you are in a coastal high hazard area based on FEMA's mapping.
And that'll apply to all new structures in the resort?
In that are located within that coastal A zone defined by the limit boundary, yes. along with the FEMA mapped zones, you have the aspect of the state's coastal construction control line boundary that has existed within the South Seas area ever since 1978 when it was first established. The current line is in 1991. So any structures seaward of that line have to comply with even stricter requirements for new habitable structures. And again, in most cases, in fact, in all cases that I've come across, the DEP 100-year storm elevation is higher than FEMA's base flood elevation in the same locations. So the higher elevation, the higher requirement will always supersede the lower requirement when setting those finished floor elevations or those minimum horizontal structural members. This just gives an example of location of where the coastal construction control line is mapped over on where the FEMA flood zones are. And in this area, based on the nearest range monument for DEP, the 100-year storm elevation is a 17.4 feet in AVD. So that is the lowest point where you can start your structural member supporting your finished floor elevation. It's the underside of that structural member. And that's to account for what the state believes is the top of the wave that would be coming through there during their 100-year storm event. To highlight some additional aspects of the NOAA slosh model data and the coastal high hazard area, I wanted to kind of look at what the Florida State Statutes, Chapter 163(2)H indicates, that the coastal high hazard area is determined by the NOAA slosh model, and it's used for planning and comprehensive amendment decisions, comprehensive plan amendment decisions. The same section of statutes indicates that NOAA-defined coastal high hazard area is the area below the elevation of a Category 1 storm surge. And so if you take the NOAA slosh model data and you overlay it on the property, the area in yellow is where the model data says that the water will be greater than 3 feet above existing grade, but lower than 6. So there'll be a range of water depth from 3 to 6 above existing grade. The blue area is where the water depth will be less than 3 feet above existing grade. And the orange is obviously greater than 6 feet above existing grade. And that's representative because that's where the lower elevations are of the beach and shoreline. So if you take the Category 1 surge level based on NOAA's slosh model, and you compare it to what FEMA has mapped in the same areas where their base flood elevation ranges from 6 to 8 feet in AVD, it's pretty consistent with the depths there. So existing ground can vary between 3 and 4 feet. So in the yellow area, it's very consistent that a depth of 3 to 6 feet above existing grade would be in the range of 6 to 8 feet in AVD, which is a lot lower than DEP's than the state's 100-year elevation of 17.4. This is just an actual screenshot of the website from the National Hurricane Center depicting where that data was retrieved from for the NOAA Category 1 slosh model. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Neil? Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, or hearing examiner.
Were you here when I
Collins.
administered the oath?
Yes.
State your name for the record.
My name is Dan Trescott with Trescott Planning Solutions, and I'm going to cover the hurricane evacuation issues for this project. Basically, a lot of the public comments that were made is that hurricanes are unpredictable. Charlie and Ian were brought up as a concern, and also that they expressed problems with issues with rapid intensification is an issue. Also, the public wanted to really know what happens when there's no evacuations recommended and storm impacts. Storm impacts still occur. Examples were Hurricane Debbie and Helene. Just about everybody that got up at the public hearing brought up hurricanes. So yeah, kind of felt like I was being picked on a bit, but that's okay. We've had a lot of hurricanes. I think the city manager of Sanibel summed it up for everybody best, and she stated that sudden turns in course mean people may not evacuate early and will result in heavy congestion during times when storm intensity is increasing and travel is becoming dangerous on the islands and on the causeway. I've been involved in this hurricane planning work for 45 years. I started in 1980 with what was called the Bureau of Disaster Preparedness at that time. Actually was hired by John Wilson. He was a former public safety director for Lee County. I can just tell you the improvements that have been made in hurricane prediction is phenomenal. We've really gone from a teletype, which is we'd get a printout on a big piece of paper of when a hurricane was approaching, we get a 3-day forecasts and probabilities of points all the way around the state, basically cities around the state. We had no cones. Now we have cones and we have cell phones. Everybody gets cones. Everybody knows where they are. You can pull up on your phone when you're looking at the weather for the day. There'll be a cone over that if you're in the cone. So I'm just saying that in the 45 years I've been doing it, the hurricane predictions have become more reliable than ever before. And also, what's really happening lately, because of some of the misunderstandings about what the cone really means, which is really, it's just where the eye is going to go as it's forecast in that cone, and sometimes they go outside the cone, but because you're in the cone, you think you're the only one vulnerable, but really, if you're south of the cone, like you see in a lot of these cases I'm going to show, you're just as vulnerable, if not more so, than being in the cone. So there's been some improvements made in the last few years where the hurricane centers improving their ways of communicating the predicted hurricane hazards outside the cone to the public as early as possible. Basically, it just came out this year that there's a 3 to 5% smaller cone this year than last year because of improvements that have been made in the forecasting. The cone is really all about forecast errors. And as the errors get less and less in their forecasting, the cone gets smaller and smaller. So all the recent hurricanes, including Charlie in 2004, that impacted Sanibel captivity area were in the 3 to 5 day cone eye landfall area, and with a hurricane watch issued 48 hours or more before landfall. The only way I really can show you what's the truth is about everybody talking about unpredictable they are is to show what the Hurricane Center puts out and when. And here's an example, Hurricane Charlie in 2004. This is a 5-day cone. We're in it, which means everybody better wake up because one's coming around us. So we're going to have to watch it closely. And that was when it was a depression. It was called a depression number 3. This is a case where Hurricane Charlie is way down there, This is a case where Hurricane Charlie, in 48 hours prior to landfall, we were issued a hurricane watch, which would have triggered a lot of things in South Seas to happen even prior to that. Once they were in the cone, they would have been starting to call people and make plans to possibly evacuate. If we look at the next slide for Hurricane Ian, 54 hours before landfall, a tropical storm watch was issued. That would have triggered, again, South Seas to go into action to start potentially, evacuating, getting all their stuff in and their guests dealt with, and gone from the resort. Prior to 48 hours, as all the data will show. For Hurricane Ian, here's a tropical storm watch goes out 45 hours from landfall. Hurricane Ian then comes up with a tropical storm warning 48 hours before landfall. Again, plenty of time to evacuate everybody from the islands. The next slide shows Hurricane Ian with a warning 36 hours before landfall, actually a hurricane warning 36 hours before landfall. Normally you get one anywhere from 24 to 36 hours, so they were right in there on the right time. See, the problem with these type of storms that come up from the south, like Charlie and Ian and even Irma, is that any deviations, I'd consider them paralleling storms, so any deviations, slight amount can make a big difference on where it actually makes landfall. But it doesn't really matter because we're in the cone. And also what I'm going to show you is because people are misrepresenting the fact that if you're not in, if you're outside the cone, you're okay. But that's far from the truth. If you're south of the cone, you got to wake up and pay attention because that's where a lot of storm surge impacts can occur, as we've seen with Milton. Now here's an example of Milton, which is just phenomenal. The hurricane watch was issued 88 hours before landfall. That's some real confidence that it's going to happen within this cone area. What's even more amazing is they came out with a warning 76 hours before landfall, which is like twice as long a warning that we would normally get. So there's plenty of time for everybody to get their plans in order and evacuate, which South Seas has done in multiple cases with Ian and Milton and Irma. The next slide shows what they're trying to convince after 2022, maybe because of the concerns of not everybody evacuating outside the cone and so forth, is they're coming out with these storm surge maps now. And this one was for Milton. It came out 88 hours before landfall, showing a 5 to 10 foot surge is possible in our area, even though landfall was quite a ways to the north. Here's a forecast of 52 hours before landfall, showing a storm surge of can't read my glasses, 8 to 12 feet. Now, rapid intensification is all this term everybody likes to use, as it's somehow some big boogeyman problem that's going to catch people off guard. But basically, the definition of it is a tropical cyclone sustained winds increase by 35 miles per hour in a 24-hour period. About 20 to 30% of those tropical cyclones do go through rapid intensification. As I've mentioned, Charlie, Ian, and Milton are examples. And all of these storms posted hurricane watches 48 hours or more before landfall, allowing plenty of time to evacuate. Another prediction tool to address rapid intensification is recently added potential tropical storm development cones. It's just quite amazing to me that you can follow this stuff and see no weather on the map, no clouds, but yet they're predicting a storm to form. It's incredible to me. And we're lucky to be living in these times to have such prediction capability. So this potential tropical storm cone gives the public even more extra time to evacuate before the storm forms. This is an example of one that was put out in June of 2022. And in this case, there was 40 hours before landfall, and it was predicted to be a tropical storm. A lot of times these storms, when they come out with the forecasts about these, if you really get into it a lot, like I tend to do, there will be detailed discussions about potential rapid intensification that may occur. But anyhow, this gives the public a lot more extra time, and it allows the Hurricane Center to issue tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings early, so that it gives people this additional time to address the potential storm surge and wind impacts of their areas. Now, because Sanibel and Captiva are in this level A evacuation zone, the Category 1 storm surge area, a potential tropical storm cone over the island would trigger a possible evacuation recommendation from cities, counties. South Seas would look at that and say, we got to prepare, we got to get everybody ready, and we got to make sure everybody's out of here before this comes and impacts us. So basically, because they're in this level A zone, the lowest level zone, that any storm that starts as a tropical storm and rapidly intensifies really won't matter, because they will have already evacuated before the rapid intensification took place that might have caused even higher storm surge levels than what they were planning for. So, and when you look at what South Seas uses for their levels of evacuation, and I've read over their preparedness plans and talked a lot with Sean about it, they just define a hurricane as a tropical system. They don't define a hurricane versus a tropical storm and what they're going to do. They're responding to all tropical systems, regardless of how small or big they are. Now, Mr. Grosso's here today, so he'll hear me talk about the questions that were asked by him. And one of them was is it accurate that Hurricane Otis in 2024 began October 24th as a tropical depression and became a Category 5 and making landfall near Acapulco in 24 hours on October 25th, and that there were still people being evacuated on the 27th? Neil didn't really even want me to get into Pacific storms, but I had to tell her the National Hurricane Center deals with the Pacific storms. They're the same, entity that deals with the Atlantic storms. The big difference is there's different modeling that goes on in the Pacific than in the Atlantic. So you can't really compare the two to really look at this issue, but in terms of me rebutting this issue, it's quite simple. But basically, most hurricanes in the Pacific tend to go away from land, head towards Hawaii. Sometimes they get up there and they hit Cabo. I think my client has a resort in Cabo, and they always talked about how, they don't come to Cabo. Well, they do, and there has been one. So the National Hurricane Center does address it. They go up and they hit Southern California, and they'll go up and they'll get up into Arizona and so forth. But in order to rebut the statement that was made about these time frames, no, the correct, if you look at what's happened, the first time that Otis was shown up as advisory number 1, 10 a.m. in the morning, and this is 63 hours from landfall, and it's October 22nd, not October 24th, as your hurricane expert indicated. And so we've got 63 hours before landfall here, and it just didn't sneak up on people. And then you've got 45.5 hours before landfall when a tropical storm watch was issued. So the answer to the question on that was no, it's not correct. He just worded it wrong and tried to trip me up, which is not possible. At all these new National Hurricane Center warning tools, in my opinion, make it basically impossible for a potential tropical storm to form or rapidly intensify 5 days prior to landfall without South Seas knowing and not being able to evacuate safely. That's the bottom line. So how do we deal with these storms when we're not in the cone? tropical storm cyclones like Hurricane Helene that moved into the Gulf. There were no cones over the islands. There were no recommended evacuations. But yet there was storm surge. I think some people had some pictures of it. Basically, in these cases, it's just basically to take shelter in place, do not drive your car on flooded roads, and certainly do not go to the beach. These type of recommendations were made by Lee County Emergency Management Director for Helene, where there were no evacuations made. So it's an example of what you need to do if you're still going to potentially get impacts. Okay, so I want to stress a little bit more about evacuation and when it occurs. The city manager and other public comment mentions people or being, the concern is people. I just want to say that the South Seas Resort prepares their people to evacuate, meaning transient guests, other homeowners in their program, staff, and they stop new arrivals from coming. Before 48 hours before landfall, if the threat looks like it's really happening and coming. So as I previously mentioned, and I might want to stress that South Seas can require a mandatory evacuation of their guests and people. They can. Maybe not the homeowners. Some of the homeowners might be stragglers, but they're warned and they're part of the whole warning process. But the city and the county has admitted that they cannot, forcibly evacuate people. It's only a recommended evacuation. It's a voluntary thing. So I try to stress that there's a difference between people outside of South Seas Resort and the people that are, everywhere else, maybe on Captiva or Sanibel. They're being told different things about when to evacuate and so forth than the people of South Seas Resort. I might mention there's never been any loss of life for any of these hurricanes within this resort. So it's a testimony that they're doing the right thing. So as I mentioned before, the early evacuation of hotel, motel guests and other guests in their program is backed up by the STAR research program where with Ian and Irma, 48 hours before landfall, there was zero occupancy at the resort. Same for Milton, even though they apparently didn't have many people in the resort at that time, but they were fully evacuated and prepared 48 hours before landfall. I might mention that for Hurricane Ian, Lee County ordered a level A evacuation at 7 a.m. on the 27th, and it was 27 hours before landfall. Might be cutting it a little close, and then on the day before that is when the city of Sanibel ordered a voluntary evacuation. And by that time, South Seas Resort people had already evacuated. Everybody's already gone. And so they're not even in this stream of evacuating traffic from Sanibel or other parts of Captiva. So this 48-hour time frame is the time period that makes the guests leave the resort. I heard the word they were kicked out. They're told to get out. They're make them go. And so this early evacuation of hotel guests from South Seas indicates that there would be no vehicles from their guests or staff adding to the 24-hour evacuation time because they would have already evacuated. I've said that now, I guess, too many times. So the early evacuation is confirmed by Sanibel Mayor and other public comments about leaving last a full day before landfall on Hurricane Ian and seeing no traffic or overwashing of the causeway prior to Ian landfall. The mayor thanked everybody for listening and preparing for the arrival of the hurricane. So the Sanibel really showed that they could get everybody out early. In reviewing the Sanibel plan, which talks about hurricane procedures and things, the Sanibel plan in section 3.1.1 mentions the city and Captiva Island were successfully evacuated in 2004 and 2005 in preparation for Hurricane Charlie and Wilma. And this is contrary to the opposition's claimings that people could get not off the island because of rapid intensification. Okay, there's another section of the plan called Provisions of the Plan in section 3.1.1 and 4.c. It says, and I quote, encourage people to respond to early warnings and hurricane watches in order to lessen evacuation burden. Section 4.4d, quote, says, keep in place a method for monitoring the number of vehicles on the island during hurricane season to determine the vehicles that need to be evacuated. So they have a procedure in place to try to figure out how many people are left on the island that have to be evacuated, particularly in the in hotel motels. Objective 3, Policy 3.6 in Section 3.1.1 encourages early voluntary evacuation of visitors to decrease the evacuation times. The city maintains a resort hotel operators list to warn them of weather conditions via weather alerts. So clearly, there's a lot of early evacuation going on, well before any 24-hour period might take place, really. To further implement early evacuation, Lee County Ordinance 83-25 is an interlocal agreement with the city of Sanibel restricting access to the Sanibel Causeway under emergency conditions, like a hurricane evacuation. And so basically, starting 40 hours before landfall, all traffic may be prohibited to Sanibel and Captiva, and it would only be allowed except for drivers, who are residents of Sanibel or Captiva and essential emergency personnel. Now, beginning at 27 hours before landfall, the city manager or other elected official of the city of Sanibel they may restrict all traffic seeking access to Sanibel on an intermittent period to allow two-way or three-way traffic to exit the island, so that, and it'll all be based on how many people they think that might be a need to evacuate still. They can basically one-way the causeway to get people out even faster past the four-way stop. So really, that would address a lot of concerns people had about stalled vehicles on the causeway or the bridge or whatever. It could be an extra place to get around them. Regarding their experts, or hurricane experts, analysis, he did not provide any analysis on how he determined his evacuation time, which apparently he claimed is a 30-minute increase because of the hotel. I have my theories on where that number came from. I think he just rounded up, because that's what the hurricane study does. You round up one, it's in half-hour increments, so maybe he just added 15 minutes to come up with half hour, but whatever. The data's not there to show it to you, so he just proffered a conclusion that there would be a 30-minute increase without any supporting data and analysis. No one, including the HEX, can determine how the time was calculated. One can only assume that the analysis that he's referred to as the DOA hearing analysis he did, which was based on his worst-case scenarios of development in South Seas, well above what they're predicting, and not the actual numbers in the application. The hurricane analysis provided at the DOA hearing on March 24th was amended multiple times and significantly overestimated increased evacuation clearance time for Sanibel Captiva. The primary problem is that the analysis does not use the most accurate and best available data to calculate evacuation clearance times as used in the statewide regional evacuation study program 2021 update for the Southwest Florida region. This analysis has four major errors that overestimated evacuating vehicles. The first one is the number of residential units does not account for the occupancy rate of these units during the hurricane season, which is much lower than the peak season that the opposition is trying to apply to hurricane season. I might add that the model itself, I say my calculations, really the model inputs that the study program uses assumed 100% occupancy of all hotel motels on Sanibel and Captiva, despite the fact that we know that that's not the case. Probably not even in peak season. But so the second thing is the total number of hotel motel units is twice as high as the TEZ data for the 2021 update for 2020 and 2025. Basically, the model says there's, the county planning department says there's 270 hotel rooms at the end of 2024 on Captiva. And also it's backed up by the Department of Business Professional Regulation data, which they're the ones that license hotel motels. The model actually assumed that there's 299 hotel rooms for 2025. So it's even overestimating what we think is there possibly. The third thing is the evacuating vehicles per unit are about twice as high for dwelling units and 60% high for hotel motels, which the 2021 update assumes is one vehicle per hotel motel unit used for evacuation. But probably the most significant error is the roadway capacity at the four-way stop. He assumes 700 vehicles per hour when Lee County expert, the transportation director, has stated it's 1,234 vehicles per hour and 1,326 vehicles per hour when a roundabout or manual traffic control is used. Essentially, manual traffic control and roundabout are the same capacity. And I've gone back, I've been doing these hurricane evacuation calculations well before computers, which is probably why I understand this better than people younger maybe that just use computers. Fancy model computers that take 3 days to run and don't even work now. That's the time model for this hurricane study. So I just think that you've got to assume that the roundabout will be used under a manual traffic control situation because the Sanibel plan actually requires it. They're going to require a traffic cop be out there at multiple locations. There's another one that I guess at Don't Access that they have traffic control at also. So all that helps speed up the capacity and gets people out quicker. So Mr. Grosso had a question I needed to ask. He says, is it true that the roundabout at the intersection of the Causeway and Periwinkle mentioned in my January 20 letter to you, the HEX, is theoretical and it does not exist and has not been funded or approved for construction? Well, yeah, the answer to yes, it has not been funded, even though I think it's the number one on the MPO list, and it should be done, even though I've heard reasons why they don't want to do it. I won't get into it, but it should be done. But the bottom line is it's going to be there. The roundabout capacity is the same as the manual traffic control capacity, and it will be in operation during the evacuation as the emergency management plan for Sanibel requires. And it says, and I quote, to ensure that the level of service of evacuation route is maintained throughout the evacuation period. So there's some more questions I thought I'd address. Some others from Mr. Grosso. Is it true that several high occupancy periods fall within the hurricane season, including July 4th and October and November and Labor Day weekend and Thanksgiving? And I would say yes, but it's not as high as the peak season that the applicant's consultant is trying to use to come up with times, although sometimes hard to determine what's going on with that. But anyhow, the next thing is were the unit occupancy rates for Sanibel and Captiva upon which you based your analysis based on occupancy rates for the months of September, which you acknowledge would be low because September month is probably the lowest occupancy rate? And the answer is no. I did not make that statement in my January 20th, 25 letter. Another question he wanted to ask is your analysis based on the assumption that 42 homes of the 1,773 units on Captiva would be occupied only it would be occupied and only 35 vehicles would be evacuated. Again, the answer is no. He cannot read. He can't even read his. Can't read the tables properly that the inputs for the model I'm going to show you. Basically, he forgot to include the hotel motels are part of that too. So it's not 45 units. The number is bigger than that because it includes hotel motels. The HEX, you wanted to know specifically more explanation regarding evacuation behaviors between hotel guests and residents. And amazingly, right after our last hearings with the public and everything, I received that day an email clarifying the answer to your question that you hadn't even answered yet. But basically, the model input for tourist evacuation assumptions is as follows. It says most will be leaving the county. 50% of the out-of-county tourists that leave the county will go to a friend or relative or other destinations. 40% of those out-of-county tourists leaving will seek hotel motels out of the county. 5% will seek public shelter in the county. The remaining 5% are not modeled because they will have assumed to already because they have left before the evacuation was issued. So really only 5% of the tourists are assumed to stay in the county and apparently going to a public shelter. Now, I included this in my January 20th letter to show you that, and I mentioned it before, is that normally I get each transportation update that's done in this regional evacuation study. They have a supplemental traffic analysis section with it's a huge spreadsheet with all the data associated with occupancy rates, vehicle use rates, all the different things you need to be able to calculate evacuation time. Well, they didn't do that this last time, so I had to ask specifically to pull the data that was going to be used in the model, and this is it for Sanibel Captiva. And I want to just highlight that, people say, oh, we use this low evacuation, this low occupancy rate everywhere. And it's just not, it's really not true. If you look at parts of Sanibel, you're looking at a 50% occupancy rate of site-built homes, 61% here. You're looking at a 61% here, even 70% in some of these. So it's not like we're assuming, way low occupancy rates for the hurricane season, but this is the data that's inputted to run the time model. Now, based on the consultant that they hired, he came, their hurricane expert, he analyzed that there would be a total of 18,757 evacuating vehicles, which is 3 times higher than the TEZ data that I just showed you calculates. So, this overestimation of vehicles resulted in what he stated to be a 22-hour evacuation time, whereas I was indicating it was 5 hours. Because my numbers are, when I used the actual time models that would have been implemented for the model, I came up with 6,127 vehicles, 3 times higher. Now, you think 22 hours, sounds bad, but really, if it were to be true, which I've told you all kinds of things where it's not going to be true, even my 5 hours is not going to be true because there's going to be a bunch of people leaving early. And plus, we've really overassumed how many people are in these hotel motel units. We're assuming 100% throughout the whole islands. And I didn't ask why they did. I need to at some point ask why. I think they're just trying to be overly protective of tourists, maybe the state. So this 22-hour time is still an acceptable time for everybody to get off because, with a 48-hour hurricane or tropical storm watch or longer, which would trigger an evacuation for both either, Sanibel or Lee County, there's plenty of time, to get out. I mean, so basically he gave a timeline in his presentation where he was trying to claim that there's 24 hours or less is the best evacuation time. And that timeline included a 12-hour response time before people evacuate, giving them time to go here or there or whatever. And then and then at what I call a pre-landfall hazard time, which is the arrival of gale force winds making it unsafe to travel on the bridge. Now, just to give an example of what I would do as a calculation for total evacuation time, which I've done many times, the 4.6 to 5 hour clearance time that I calculated assumes that the four-way stop is going to operate at capacity, this manual traffic control capacity, throughout the evacuation. This is what I would call a quick response time. And I went back and looked at some of my old, got off on track, looked at some of my old evacuation studies that I did, and the capacities that I used for Sanibel to evacuate are essentially the same as we're using here today. Not much has changed. So what I want to say is that this quick evacuation time, this 1,327 vehicles per hour that can get through there with manual traffic control, is kind of like, it's kind of like a fire or a tornado. You just pick up your stuff and you go. You don't take 12 hours to get ready to go. You go. And besides, you probably know well ahead of all this time before you leave that it's coming anyway, and so you're probably already prepared to go. And if you do the right thing, you're supposed to prepare before the hurricane season even starts anyway. So to give you an example, if I had a 5 hour clearance time, which is what I calculated, and I add a 6 hour response time, which is generous, and there is a 6 hour response time as part of the time model that you can use, and you add an 8 hour pre-landfall hazard time, which that actually can be calculated on the fly. The Hurricane Center has a thing where you can determine when the arrival of gale force winds will occur to your location. So if you add up 5 plus 6 plus 8, you get 19 hours, below 22, below 24. And if you add even a 12-hour response time, with my scenario, it's 25 hours total. So there's plenty of time for people to get off of these barrier islands before conditions get bad. With all this early warning stuff that we got going on, with all this cones and cell phones, emergency alerts that we get in the middle of the night and wake us up and tell us, one guy mentioned that the Lee County ordered an evacuation just before landfall. I think he's misrepresenting the fact that he got an alert that probably said, if you haven't evacuated yet, go to a safe place, go up or something like that. They made some recommendations like that. So there's plenty of time is what I'm trying to say. There was plenty of time to get those people off Fort Myers Beach that didn't leave. There's plenty of time for people to leave if they want to leave, but not everybody wants to leave for various reasons. A lot of times it's related to animals. All right, so the next thing, and I'm almost done. I know you all want me to get through this. There's a lot to cover. Everybody was picking on me, so I want to cover it all. The next one had to do with Objective 73.1 evacuation, where it talks about, the county working to obtain out-of-county evacuation for Category 5 event, Level E, that does not exceed the timeframes referenced in the statewide regional evacuation study. The county will improve clearance times by increasing shelter availability, improving evacuation routes, public shelter, public awareness, and citizen participation. And I might add, the county is responsible for complying with this objective, and they work on evacuation of public information and shelters. I think you'll hear a little about this later, maybe from the public transportation director. Basically, he's trying to say that between 2010, when the first study came out, that he worked on, until this last one that's come out in 2021, that the times have gone up. The problem is you can't just go from 2010 to that to 2021. First of all, the population increased between 2010 and 2025 by about 32%. And some of that had to do with the fact that the slosh model changed in 2017 that actually expanded the area that was going to be flooded. So it included more people. So you really couldn't do a proper comparison between the two.
Can you take us to those slides?
Sorry. This is the one where he was using to compare between 2010 and all these scenarios. He's increased from 2010. This is my table that I put together, and I just compared it between 2017. And the reason being, as I mentioned, the slosh model would be the same for 17 and 2021. And so basically, what we're saying here is that the 2000 update would be a closer population level to compare with, since all the level A through E times have gone down from 2017, even though the population increased. Shows a significant compliance with the objective 73.1. I might also add that the Jeff Alexander DOA analysis and letter to the HEX, the DOA wanted to mention that the DOA final order for the Civic Center Association versus Lee County ruled in favor of Lee County regarding consistency with Objective 72.2 and Objective 73.1 and all these policies I've listed. Basically, the order states, the DOA order states, the petitioner presented no evidence that the ordinance 23-33, being the height and resiliency ordinance, is inconsistent with these objectives and policies. Implementation of these policies show that Lee County has met these objectives by stronger wind-resistant buildings with new higher flood elevation requirements, which we're dealing with here today, improving clearance times by increasing shelter availability within the county, improving evacuation routes. They've spent almost $1 billion since 1987, and increasing public awareness and citizen participation. So for policies 72.1.6 and 101.3.5, South Seas will pay All Hazard Protection Fund, the MSTU, yearly as part of their property taxes, which will help continually fund all these things the county needs to do to get everybody prepared for a hurricane. And they've also going to be paying $38,606 for shelter and evacuation impact fees for shelter as required by the Land Development Code in the Hurricane Preparedness section. Okay, so another rebuttal that I had to deal with was that the Category 5 clearance time would increase by 3.6 minutes is flawed. I was called a lot of names in his testimony. I don't take it personal. And he claims that only the time model can calculate this time. Well, he'd gone on record saying the time model is inoperative, and that if it did work, it'd take 3 days. It's just not acceptable to be used in a real-time scenario. I mean, I've read up everything on the model. It says it's supposed to be easy to use, but it's far from it. You got to buy special City Labs license to make it run. And if it takes 3 days to run, you got to start running the dang thing before there's a cone even affecting your area. It's just not, it's not going to work. And so I just want to say that the method I've used to calculate the 5-hour clearance time for the islands and the 3.6 out-of-county times, the same method I've been using for 30 years since the first evacuation study that was done in the United States for Lee County in 1979. I'm not sure you all realize that, but we were the guinea pig for the first evacuation study in the nation, funded by the Corps of Engineers. This original methodology was peer-reviewed by experts in the field and was found to be an acceptable way to calculate evacuation time. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but if there's no model to calculate it like he wants to use it, no wonder he can't calculate it, because he couldn't accept the way I calculate it with it, which is the only way you can calculate it when you don't have a model. It's quite simple. You have a certain number of vehicles have to evacuate, and you got to get them through a choke point. You figure out the time. It's an easy number. And so anyhow, I just want to say that the time model projections that have come out of 70 to 90 hours under this base scenario for a Category 5 is not proven to be realistic. We have not seen times like that. And I have to say that you could literally walk out of the county faster than those times. Think about it. You can do it. You can walk out faster. If you're sitting in traffic, you just get out and go. If I can't, just 70 hours, 90 hours is just, I get laughed at when I go to make presentations at other counties and so forth. They start laughing. So there's no evidence in past hurricanes of these high evacuation times. Most of the problems with these high projections is model input assumptions. You've heard the old adage. I don't want to say it's garbage in, garbage out, but it can be that, but it's not really all garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure there's a lot of good things that come about. It's just somehow this model is not really reflecting reality. All right, regarding, Mr. Grosso had another question regarding evacuation times. He says, is it true that you did not personally perform any of the evacuation clearance time calculations in the statewide regional evacuation study program? It's a trick question. I have to say yes, I did use the study program update. I used the TEZ data that I showed you in that table to calculate the clearance time increase. And I put that in the letter to you on my January 20th letter. Their expert did not provide any data analysis for his 30-minute increase in clearance time because he relies on the time model, which is not working. It takes 3 days to run this simple calculation for the islands. Okay, the next rebuttal, I'm almost done, had to do with the fact that he's confused about the storms, the FEMA flood coastal high hazard area and the slosh coastal high hazard area. And our last expert really, I believe, cleared that up. So I really won't go into it in, well, I'm sorry. I've gotten ahead of myself yeah, no, he did. So, you showed this picture, but this is the coastal high hazard areas as referred to by FEMA. And I might add, just to clear up, that the FEMA elevations are really, it's not designed necessarily to protect people's lives. The slosh model is designed to protect people's lives by doing these maximum storm surges that the model predicts. The FEMA flood insurance program is used for actuarial rating purposes for flood insurance to determine, what the insurance rate should be. It's for property actual rating purposes, not for saving your life. So basically, the coastal high hazard area really does cover most of the island. There's some little upland pieces that are a little higher than the Category 1 flood level. Now, on the next thing, and the last thing really, is sea level rise. I don't know if you remember, but I did work on the first sea level rise study for the state of Florida in the year 2000. We got a grant from EPA under the Bush administration to look at what, a 5 and a 10 foot, a 2-foot rise this century would be, and a 3-foot rise next century, what it would look like. We were chosen because we were good at doing storm surge mapping, and storm surges are just looking at water rising for a short period of time, whereas sea level obviously is permanent. So I did that study, and the basic premise of that whole study really was that if you're a landowner and you have uplands, you have the right to hold back the sea by elevating or doing whatever's necessary to get you higher and hold back the sea. You can build seawalls. That's what people are doing all over, everywhere, Cape Coral, all over the place. I've got a new house going on in my neighborhood. The guy's 2 feet higher than my house. I'm going to his house, I guess. So basically, the reality is that the development in these coastal areas have been elevating structures and filling land to avoid flooding from hurricane storm surge, which indirectly helps with sea level rise. And they've been doing this since 1968 when the National Flood Insurance Program, since really before 1968 when the National Flood Insurance Program really started making you elevate. If you didn't want to, you had to. So it indirectly deals with it. And I might mention that the woman that testified from the erosion control district mentioned that she was filling land on the backside of the island to address sea level rise. So it's happening there. And so what I want to say too about is that the FEMA maps, FEMA is, I've done some research on it, is actively developing methods to incorporate sea level rise in their future map and risk assessment. Now, the building code and this 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain requirement, I'm pretty sure it's for sea level rise, but they just don't want to say it. So that's okay. It's, in my opinion, it also addresses sea level rise. And in fact, The reason why I say this is because many local governments that I've worked with around the state have already admitted that this 1 foot extra is for sea level rise. It's part of their comprehensive plan. So, and then the coastal construction control line, it also addresses sea level rise in their elevations. So what I'm saying is that therefore any new development in South Seas is going to address sea level rise one way or the other through the plus 1 foot or the coastal construction control line. So in summary, the critical link clearance time to evacuate all occupied units on Captiva and Sanibel of 5 hours is a completely acceptable and safe evacuation. The increase in evacuation caused by 356 additional units in South Seas Resort will not cause the 2025 operational 25.5 hour Category 5 out-of-county clearance time. I'm sorry. Will not cause a 2025 operational 25.5 hour Category 5 out-of-county clearance time to exceed 48 hours, which is normally provided by the National Hurricane Center, as I have given you multiple examples of. And I mentioned that there's never been, because of South Seas, very rigid control of their people within their resort, there has been no loss of life from any hurricanes within that resort. So in conclusion, it's my opinion, professional opinion, that the South Seas MPD has met and or exceeded all applicable standards and demonstrated consistency with the land plan and the land development code. And I could list all those things, but you'll have a copy of this. And that's all I have to say. Too much probably, but any questions from anyone? Oh, I meant to give you this. This was the email I received from Andrew Sussman, who clarified where the tourists were going in the model that they were inputting.
So that was based on that one slide you had?
Yeah, it's based on,
You
well,
have different percentages as to where they
yes,
were going.
yes.
Okay.
It was at the bottom of the slide. I put it in there. So I take this very seriously. In closing, I've been doing these calculations and I used to do it on a handheld calculator, and it was really amazing how long it had to take to do stuff, because it's just multiple calculations. But finally, spreadsheets came out. I put it all in a spreadsheet. It was easier to calculate, but take it very seriously. When I heard about the people dying on Fort Myers Beach, I'm like, there was enough time to get everybody out, but some people just didn't want to leave. And maybe it's more up to people to be more forceful about evacuation or keep records of elderly people that might not know about what's going on, and maybe go get them and get them out, because it was mostly elderly folks that died. And I just think that, who knows, maybe they had dementia, maybe they just don't understand as well as younger folks or something. But it's these calculations are very important, and it's also important to go back and look at what happened after the fact to see if what you thought was going to happen, what happened in reality, and compare that. And that's all done too with storm surge modeling and so forth, that they go back and look at how it performed, the models and so forth. So any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sean, are you going to be short?
Yeah, I will be. Yes, Dan's going to be a tough one to follow. Unbelievable passion. So what I did, and I apologize, now everybody's sick of seeing cone models. It's not something that we're always excited to see, but what I wanted to do was just kind of give context to what's really happening in the resort, because we gave you already a copy of the emergency preparedness plan, and it kind of outlines those levels. And I believe your question was, at what level are you evacuating? Is it red? Is it yellow? When are those things happening? You're trying to understand a very specific, it hits this, and that's what you do. And unfortunately, as Dan has described, as everybody's brought up with their concerns, they're all different. If we have king tides, that's different impact on the resort and potentially could cause us to adjust our movement, not necessarily change the category because we're not in a watch or we're not in a warning. So I just wanted to give you some real communications that actually show what we did during these storms and what the actions were taken, just so you can understand the context of how we dynamically work and address this. This would be Hurricane Irma, and this is September 5th, and obviously we're just tickling into the cone here. And this is a communication from me. It's out to Lucinda Carter and Scott Thompson. Those are two property managers. Lucinda oversees two of the associations within the gates. And I'm sorry, I could go back to the sheet that I gave you earlier that kind of showed all the different associations. When you pull into the resort, there's 20 different associations. No master association. We are obviously one of the bigger entities, so we kind of play a role in some aspects like this where we're communicating out to the 20 associations, hey, this is what the resort operations are doing in the storm. And this email is just saying, hey, this is what we're doing. We're starting to move this stuff around. We're watching the storm. We'll keep you posted on what's going on. We're not responsible for each and every one of those associations. As I showed you in the earlier slide, we have guests that are in those, and that's what we're going to be actioning those guests inside those associations, but we're communicating to those other associations what we're doing so they understand it. Whether they decide to follow that or not, as somebody else said, we can't control them. We can control the people that are renting through us, our guests, et cetera. So I just wanted to share some of the very realistic and things that were going on. So again, Irma, this is September 5th. We're just tickling into the cone, and we've already started to have meetings and start moving things in that direction and communicate it to the other associations, those actions. September 6th, and this was on my other presentation, kind of showed the on the left-hand side of the slide, is the STAR report showing our occupancy going from that higher occupancy. And as the storm gets into that cone, organically, guests are like, we don't want to be around, we're out. As we start taking the resort apart and start demobilizing the pool area, cabanas, et cetera, you see that occupancy go down. So this is just a repetitive one before landfall, excuse me, on the 10th. On the 7th, this is a communication out to, at that time, this was our ownership group. It was a previous ownership group, and kind of outlining what was going on, what we're expecting from the storm. And in this case scenario, we're in a watch at this point, but it's outlining all of the things that we're doing, what we're not doing, who we've communicated to in those actions. So again, it's just a document to show you that we've already worked with Lee County Sheriff, we're with EMS, we've interacted and spoken to everybody so they know the status of the resort. So we are not that entity that's a problem or adds to the already problem that everybody's dealing with in the area, or on the island, I should say. And here is September 8th. It is a email going out again to our ownership. Update Friday, 11 o'clock, and the storm was landfall on the 10th. All guests are gone. Team members are, except essential staff, we're just wrapping up and recapping what we are. We're gone. The evacuation is not done for other places, but we are already out, and we're 2 days before landfall, which was on the 10th in this case. So again, just to show you, because I can show you all kinds of documents that show you we have procedure and process and everything. This is really what it looks like and how we actually get through it in the different cases. Hurricane Ian, more recent, obviously. This is this current ownership. So now it's a new ownership, new management group that I work for. Timbers in this case scenario, but it's the same case scenario. As you can see on September 24th, we are just tickling the cone here on Ian, and process has already started. We've already worked through, we've communicated with our staff, made sure they're in process, reached out to ServPro, make sure they're on ready standby if we happen to need those types of services, and confirm that everything is already in motion. Obviously, again, this is like the STAR report and everything we had in there. This email here on the right-hand side, Maureen is she's currently our resort manager. At this time, she was our director of owner services. This is an email out to all of the associations. Those are all the board presidents, and giving them the update at what we're doing on September 25th. Again, landfall for this was on the 28th, but kind of updating them what we're doing, the guests that we're informing in each of your associations, the owners in the association, our rental program, et cetera, et cetera.
What is competitive set?
Competitive set would be the people we rent against. So everything from, it could be Sundial Resort, it would be Key Largo, could be the Hyatt Coconut Point, things like that, other properties. That's where they pull it from. So it all depends on who we're selling against. It's
So their numbers are dropping too as in the wake of the storm?
in some case scenarios. So sometimes the comp set could be up in Tampa. Maybe they don't have it necessarily coming there. It could be different locations. We have two different comp sets. One for destination type events like weddings, stuff like that, that aren't necessarily in the same exact spot in Florida. So they may not be impacted. So the comp set decline in occupancy may be the same if they're closer to us in the storm's head in that direction, like us. September 26th, again, this is a note out from me to ownership and leadership group, just updating on where the storm is at this time. We are in a watch and we are wrapping everything up. Everything's already on its way down. Again, the detail, and you can kind of cross-reference it to our emergency preparedness plan, showing that we're communicating these things are done, and that's exactly how it happens. And then the 27th, this was just a note. To the right-hand side is actually the evacuation from Lee County, which happened on the 27th at 2 p.m. This is my note out to our ownership group at 3 o'clock on the 27th, and basically the resort's closed. We're gone. The evacuation order just came out from Lee County, but we are already out of there. So again, the slides were just meant to help keep in context what actually happens, because it's easy enough to write a plan, but to execute against it. The property's always done that. So again, I think I said it in my testimony before. The team that was there when it was Charlie, it was not me, but they did similar, and they created all that plan. So there's always been that sense of urgency and understanding that we are on Captiva, and it requires another level of attention to those types of details. So that's basically what the slides were for reference point. And that's all I had, so I didn't have all that. But any questions about that?
Yeah, go back to the other. Is this the bullets on the ones on the right side? Is that part of your letter?
No, that was just I was just trying to find, I was Google searching, trying to find the appropriate document that I could copy paste. I am not a PowerPoint expert, trying to find it, so I had to copy paste off of one of the websites listing
So
Lee
on
County
this
evacuation.
date- So what you're attempting to illustrate here is that on this date, September 27th, the county had already announced mandatory evacuations for zones A, B, and partial C. And at this point, this is the message you sent to say that.
We're already out.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
out.
they've
except for-
issued evacuation, but we're already done with the
And what's
evacuation.
HGVC unit?
Hilton Grand Vacation, that's the timeshare units on the property.
Okay.
Because we don't manage, again, those guests. We communicate with them, obviously, because we knew where they were and their status, but we don't manage them, so we stay in close contact.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
I just have a question. So basically, all the experts talk about evacuation time is that time to evacuate from when the order is given.
Correct.
But in all the examples you provided, by the time that order is given, you're already there, gone.
We're either gone or almost completely there. And I think what Dan spoke to and all the models he showed is the technology gives us that. I mean, 30 years of storms, if you're in the cone, like Dan said, you're going to get some type of impact from it. So you better start preparing one way or the other. So I don't think, we don't wait for this ownership and the previous ownership understand that the cost of having to have people leave early and potentially lose some money by canceling reservations is minimal compared to not doing the right thing, being greedy, and having people stuffed in the hotel and having a last-minute panic. So, I mean, the message has always been that way to me, and we'll always operate that way.
So you're not part of that evacuation time, bottom line, because you're gone.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Answer your question, I get it. That's it? Thank you.
Taking a break.
He has not been
sworn.
He's our new expert. No, he's been sworn. You were sworn.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Why don't we come back a few minutes after 3, and we'll resume then. Thank you.
You've been accepted as an expert.
Good afternoon. We're back on the record. Applicant's rebuttal. Next witness.
Hi. My name's Steve Shawless. I was not sworn in this morning.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you put in the record will be the truth?
It will.
Thank you.
And I have copies of my resume. I'm not sure I've been qualified professional witness here.
All right, you perhaps hand me your resume, and then you can give us a brief rundown of your academic and work experience.
So I've been surveying for over 40 years. Licensed in 2003.
Speak up, please.
Licensed in 2003. Been in Lee County, I think, since 1987. And I'm project surveyor on this particular project. Current sitting president for Florida Survey and Mapping Society in the Collier Lee chapter. And that's me.
Okay, you may proceed.
So I also have a couple more, 3 copies of this exhibit. And what I'm going to do is briefly run through the access easements as they run through the property and the ownership of that. Okay? So these are old-timey 24 by 36 sheets because the print gets awful small. And I'll give copies over here.
Okay, so this will be a composite exhibit. And what does it depict exactly?
The roadway easements as they run through the property. Surveyors and maps.
You have multiple copies?
I did 3.
All right, well, let me have a second copy because we're going to have to find a way to make this available to the board. An electronic copy.
We can provide an electronic copy.
Okay. You know, I don't know how in the weeds they're going to get with this. Are they going to look at, certain exhibits or not? But we like to have everything available. Yes, please.
I have a couple also. Also, copies of the recording instruments for each one of the easements.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, that was for her. That was for her.
Oh, thank you.
I can get you one too.
You have one? I need one because I have 2.
Bad throw.
I didn't know you need one too.
More? Is this everything? All your exhibits? All right. I'm ready.
Applicant has the legal rights to utilize the entirety of the South Seas Plantation Road via ownership of approximately 61% of the roadway or via easements over the other 39% of the roadway. Title opinion and boundary survey provided by Lee County in accordance with the LCD requirements. Title opinion and survey deemed sufficient by Lee County Zoning Division. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go to the survey itself. We prepared this exhibit to clarify the access easement location and ownership. For clarification purposes, we highlighted the boundary survey prepared by Blue and Associates to still illustrate the access easements by recording instrument and what parcels they lie in.
Okay, so orient me for a minute. Where am I within the resort right here?
This is the southerly boundary, and Captiva Drive is running east and west on this.
I see. So we're at the entrance.
We are. The darker green is SSIR ownership. And you can see the lighter green is actually owned by somebody else in this area. I believe that is 1414. Right, that's Beach Villas. So on the top right-hand corner of each sheet, and you'll see this on the full size, we've color-coded the easement and whether it's owned by SSIR or if it's owned by others.
Okay, but if it's owned by others, they have an easement right to cross. That was your testimony.
Correct. So as an example, the darker green is depicting OR 1846, page 807. And the darker portion is the portion that lies within SSIR property. The lighter green shows the ownership outside of SSIR property.
What was the date of that easement?
It's on the recording.
Okay,
and that would
early
be-
70s?
They're highlight, yeah, 1848, 1846, 807,
807.
highlighted on the top.
Yeah, I see that. That's 86th. The first one is 981-730. I don't know what this corresponds to, but that's from 73. Then we have another one in 86th. This one doesn't have a date. How is that possible?
Different portions. Yeah, we'll get through that.
93. '84. Okay. So the resort was in operation quite a few years before these 1980 easement documents.
Correct. Also, inside that stack is what we found to be the first easement written, I believe was in OR book 981.
Yeah, 981-730, that's 1973.
Correct. That was modified several different times, so the easements we're going to be talking about now are what we see as the ones that are in place now. And as a matter of fact, if you look to the left of that green shading, you see the dashed lines that make a little hook right there. That's actually the original easement that was written. Okay, 981 page, whatever that was, in 1973 or whatever,
So the contours of the easement has changed over time.
significantly. And it looked like it changed every time there was a different design change in the property lines of each portions of the developments. And that has happened from one end of the parcel all the way through to the other end, okay? So if we go through, and again, if you look at the big paper sheets, those are legible. These are real hard to see on this screen, but the PDFs will be legible. So we can go through and we can see, again, we kept the same shading. The lighter green is owned by others, but granted, but it's written actually by the original owners of South Seas Plantation, okay? And you can see that there's a small portion on the right-hand side of the easements, it's under SSIR ownership, and the majority in this area is owned by others. Excuse me. As we travel north, kind of the same scenario. And then we hit this area where it is entirely on SSIR property.
Is the paved road wholly within the easement?
I believe so. Although it's not always within one ownership's property, it meanders back and forth between properties. And again, we did not conduct this survey. This was the survey that was used for, that was done for this hearing. Okay. We didn't prepare this, we just highlighted the ownership portions in the easements. Again, through here, it's completely SSIR property. This is going past the utility area. And What happens with the easement, you'll notice, is that in the beginning, where the most traffic is, the easement is the wider. As we go up the island, less and less people use it, the easement shrinks in size. Right? And then this particular easement terminates right there, and that blue line on the top is, we'll call the south end of the beach house restaurant area, right? Or where the 30-foot beach access easement is. Okay? So if we go to the next slide, we can see we change easements. This is the previous slide. The dark green terminates, and then the cayenne color takes over. Again, there's another easement that carries us through this area here. The marina's on the right-hand side, golf course on the left. And then you can see, as we have that little turn right there, a small portion of the easement lies within a condominium. The first one was Beach Villas condominium. The next one,
And that's the reddish hatching on the right
Correct.
side?
correct. Actually, that condominium boundary comes out to the center line of the road in that area.
Okay.
And then if we go north from there, we can see this easement has been modified again. The cayenne color is no longer affect the shading, or the hatching is where the roadway is built. So what we did is we showed the ownership of the easements that are now where the roadway is built. Okay? And that carries all the way through around another condominium and up to the entrance of Land's End condominium. Okay?
What's the shading on the left side?
The left side is where the roadway is, that hatching. The cayenne shading is the original easement in this area, but that was modified again. Then again, the hatching, the legend, you know, if you open up that big sheet, you'll be able to drill down and actually see
And
that
what does the
information.
purple represent?
Where one easement dovetails back into another. The original easement and the modified easement both come together in that area.
All right, and that's the top of the island.
Correct, that's Land's End. And again, what we did was we calculated the ownership percentages, which we went over earlier.
So the important takeaway for me is that the applicant has right to use the entire road.
Correct.
Okay.
Any questions?
No question, thank you.
Super.
Good afternoon again, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Carl Baracco. I'm going to go over the roadway design and deviation for the South Seas, excuse me, internal resort roadway. Deviation 14 is basically just to memorialize the existing conditions. And as part of that, when staff reviewed the information I submitted, which I'll go over in just a minute, they did ask for some signing and marking for the bicycles in accordance with the manual and uniform traffic control devices. And they also asked when we do that to do a detailed review of the roadway pavement condition. So we agreed to that. And that,
Is this new
no,
from the original, or this is the original you're showing me?
this is the original,
Deviation and the original subject to language?
yes.
Okay.
But I'm going to show you two renditions of the existing sections, and when I get through, I'll explain why. But this is what we initially submitted to staff, and it shows 4 locations where we went in and survey located the roadway to obtain the existing conditions. And I'm going to walk quickly through them. Again, this is at section 1. That's roughly 24.8 feet, and remember, these are typical sections. It varies continually throughout. The next section, 26.6 feet wide. And then Section 3 and Section 4 are very similar, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. And the reason I did that is because after staff reviewed those the first time, they came back and asked for us to locate the pavement markings, which we did. And this is this next set. And going through this, you'll see that we simply just added the pavement markings and some details. And the reason I showed that to you is because in Mr. Rourke's testimony, he thought there was an error in typical sections. I went through the typical sections and I could not find an error. My only conclusion is that he did not have an opportunity to review the initial sections. He only reviewed the second set. And without knowing that first set was there, it would have been more difficult to evaluate that new information was put on there, because if we had that information from the beginning, we would have showed it differently. It would have been clearer. So I don't think there is any error in typical sections, but he may not have had the benefit of the initial sections. Now, this is a photograph at Section 2, and I'll back up just a minute and show you. That's where Section 2 is. And that's right here. And I want to stay on this section for a bit. A few points about this roadway in particular. The facility is posted with 19 mile per hour speed limits. That's been there as long as I can remember, which is several decades. There's a manned guardhouse at the beginning as the entrance to the resort facility. It's patrolled by resort security. And Sean will present some incident reports when I'm done after my conclusion. This roadway currently provides access for passenger cars, trolleys, golf carts, and pedestrians. I've been fortunate to have personal experience out on this facility in golf carts several times, and all of those times I found the facility in a golf cart to be very appropriate for the use and the traffic and the conditions. So what I'm trying to say is I don't think this facility functions as a typical roadway, but rather it functions as a resort facility. One analogy I can make, and you may or may not have ever had the opportunity to visit Disney World, but there's a Fort Wilderness, very large resort, and its internal transportation facility is extremely similar to this. It's gated, it's open drainage, it does have sidewalks, but it carries the same traffic, and it carries 40-foot recreational vehicles and travel trailers with trucks, and the golf carts and passenger vehicles and the same traffic. And they really work well, and I think it's because it's a resort facility, and that's what people expect when in this area. That's what I expected when I was using that as a guest. Finally, I think you heard Mr. Treese say that when this resort is closed, a closed system, in other words, you can only come in if you're a guest or an owner, and a lot of the other public is not coming in for the boat rentals and the cruises and all those things, that the traffic internal will go down. So in conclusion, in my professional opinion, this facility has and will continue to function as a resort transportation facility, and it will be enhanced with the additional signing and marking and pavement conditions that staff suggested.
Thank you.
One more thing before Sean comes up. I do have the incident reports, and I did review them myself. He's going to go over them with you.
Can you say that again, Carl? You went fast and I think I missed it.
Sure. The resort continually has incident reports if there's an incident, and I've reviewed the incident reports, so that was part of my review and my knowledge of this facility. Sean's going to go over the reports in detail.
Okay, before you leave, then, let me ask you a question. As an engineer, when you've reviewed this road, I believe you testified you traveled on it numerous times. In your opinion, is that road safe?
First, I traveled in both a passenger vehicle and in golf carts, and yes, I do believe it's safe for its intended use and its historic use.
Thank you.
I promise, I think it's my last time. So we just went through the main road, and basically my part here is that I went back through all the records. Obviously, within the gates, we are a gated community. So it is our security team that does incident reports of anything that happens on that road inside there. So we went back through from 2018 up till now. We only had 5 recorded guest incidents on that road throughout the resort. 2 of them had injuries, both minor, but 2 of them did. 3 of them were guests operating golf carts improperly, too fast, turning quarters too fast, not paying attention. 1 was a vehicle striking a maintenance cart that was working on the side of the road, because we do the maintenance on the road, trimming the mangroves, et cetera, to keep that width. And a car just clipped his mirror on the way going down there. And the 3rd one was a third property manager actually hitting an owner, out of program owner, walking the road down through there. So from 2018 up to this point, those are the incidents. I have copies for you of the incidents, so you can take a look at those and see what they are. I do think it's important to say, though, on the road, one of the things that this ownership has done has moved forward with a project on the front of the resort, the Captiva Landing, the water park in the front, which historically our operations, over 60% of the inventory that we rented that enjoyed our facilities, which were on the north end of the resort, the main pool area and all of that activity, 60% of our inventory was staying on this end of the resort. So in order to do that daily, they were making that rounds, and this ownership we've put in a significant water park on this end of the resort that is walking distance, literally, from 60% of the inventory in our rental program currently. So I think that's
Before
important.
that, the main pool was on the north end?
Correct. Correct. So I mean, there's more things going on. We mentioned in the traffic, the moving of Captiva cruises, which invited outside guests that were not resort guests to come into the resort, to go down to the other end of the resort, using this road to go to the main marina where Captiva cruises would go out from. We also had a golf cart provider that did water sports. They brought in people to do water sports activities, so there was some car traffic that came into the resort. So I know a lot of people we're just being, all enclosed and everything like that, but all those moves have added to that, depleting the amount of traffic on the road. So I just say that because I don't know that it necessarily is clear in all these different tidbits of information.
So no longer inviting these third-party vendors in?
100%. To add that to the traffic on the road, Captiva Cruise would go out for multiple cruises, and they could have anywhere 50 to 100 cars in a day that would come into the resort and park on that end, and they went down this road, as you saw, that was in there. I mean, we do have the added construction trucks right now as well, but normally in golf cart and bikes and pedestrians and other things that operate within the resort and in that space, that's what the road's really meant to do. So I have copies for you.
Thank you.
Sean, I just have a couple questions. I know from the first day that you testified that you have worked in other resorts. So is this similar, better than, worse than other resorts that you've worked in?
As far as
Incidents?
I would say, honestly, I mean, South Seas is nothing like anything I've worked in a lot of different ways. But from an incident standpoint, it's a different model. People go to South Seas as families, as travel. It's not a downtown or a destination place where you have a lot of that weekend craziness. We don't normally get that. Yeah, they're difficult to compare. So from an incident standpoint, and I did not operate something that had a road of this type of length. I operated 44 acres and 22 acres, but they didn't have that kind of more marina-based stuff.
Okay. You talked about third-party property manager. What is that?
So if example, you own a home, if you didn't want to give that to us and have us manage your property, rent it for you and manage that process, you can pay a third-party management company that manages your property for you. They may rent it, they may not, they may just handle the maintenance of it, prepare it for your personal visits and stuff. So we have homeowners throughout that have property managers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, you're starting Beach House? Do you need anything? Do you have the easement document?
Sure, absolutely. Again, Steve Shawless, the surveyor.
Hang on a second.
Sure. Okay, so this is the 30-foot beach access easement. There was a lot of discussion about, first of all, I think there might have been some confusion as to whether the property lines matched, if there was a gap. There is no, not that we know of. Okay. Also, oh, actually, I have the recording instruments here. If you want a copy of that.
This is the beach access easement,
30-foot beach access easement, yes.
and the date's 1960?
It is. An oldie but a goodie. So the question, I suppose, is how many cars were out there in 1960? Use of this easement was limited to people in government lots 3 and 1, I believe. This exhibit shows those. Government lot 1 is on the left-hand side. Government lot 3 is on the south of section 22. Okay. And
Lot 1 is pink, Lot 2 is green.
yes, I believe so. We'll go back. Yep. And then here, this is a portion of the easement. Just want to point out the purpose of the easement. It's purpose of ingress and egress to the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. There's been some discussion as to vehicular traffic. It is, the easement states that the westerly 200 feet of said easement is and shall be limited to pedestrian use only. The remaining easterly portion of the easement may be used for vehicular parking as well as pedestrian uses. Okay. There's a copy of the document. It's a 30-foot wide beach access easement, provides ingress and egress to the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Notes pedestrian use and permissions for parking. Not a right-of-way, street, or road per definition and minimum roadway specifications in LDC Chapter 10. From what we understand, 224 units have access rights aside from SSI or ownership LLC. Okay. So I'll back up 1 second and just bring something up as to how you determine the line of where vehicular traffic has to stop and it can only be used by pedestrian. And the way this easement's written, it's a little bit vague. If we go back, to the easement, I believe what it states is that the easement terminates at the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. You can interpret that as the mean high water of the Gulf of Mexico. And what the easement states is that the westerly 200 feet is for pedestrian only. So we can say that from the the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, 200 feet easterly is pedestrian only, and define the line that way, right? Well, the mean high water changes monthly. Every storm event, that shoreline moves. So it's a little hard to actually pinpoint exactly where that line would be. You could hold the original easement language, because it has a distance more or less to the waters, you could hold that, or you could use a current day mean high water. It's an interpretation that would actually, take a judge to decide, I'd imagine. So I just want to kind of bring that up, is that line is a little bit liquid. We're not exactly sure where that should be. Now, as what I would say, I would try to hold the spirit of the easement as it was written, and hold the geometry or the position of it when it was created. Do you have any questions?
How do we know where that was, though?
If we were to read through here, it actually gives a distance from the easterly side of the easement, more or less to the roughly to the foot of where the mean high water was in 1960 when it was written.
Okay. So that's a point on the map,
Yes,
west of which no cars.
correct, which is what it says. Is that it? Questions?
Thank you. No, sir.
Last time today, I promise. For the record, Carl Baracco, I'm going to go over a few items on the beach house development order. The development order for the beach house was issued under development standards and allowable uses for this tract under the administrative interpretation. It was approved as an amenity, but it also references commercial for building permit purposes so that they can obtain a building permit. There is no on-site parking required for the amenity per the ADD. There's a 10-foot setback from Southeast Plantation Road required and provided. And after the building walls were constructed, the building was survey located, and it is slightly greater than 10 feet, so that setback is satisfied. There is a minimum 10-foot building separation required and provided in the ADD. There are no buffer plantings required per the ADD. The beach house setback is greater than 20 feet from the property line, therefore no buffer is required. And then,
Is it greater than 20 feet from the property line?
yes, the
You
building.
said it was 10 feet.
No, that's the property line. When I said 10 feet, that's the right of way. If I said property line, I apologize. The 10 feet is from Southeast Plantation Road,
So what is the 20 feet?
from the south property line.
Don't you go to an,
But I thought there was testimony that there was just 10 feet from the edge of the easement to the building. Didn't somebody
This is-
say that?
The 20 feet is from the building to the property line, independent of the easement.
just advance to the
He's
next slide.
on the property line.
Maybe show her.
Okay, you're going to someone else's slides?
These are your, that's yours.
So we're talking here. The 10 feet is here, and the 20 feet is here.
So the 20 feet goes into the easement?
Yes.
Easements are property.
Because they own it.
No, the building is outside the easement. It's 30 feet.
The building is greater than 20 feet from the property line, independent of the easement.
Okay.
And,
The beach house restaurant is more than 20 feet from the property line?
yes.
The easement is ours, our land.
What is this? Somebody should know.
That might be more clear when the architect comes up and
Okay.
use that. And if not, I can come back and try to explain it a little bit better, but I think it'll be clear. And then finally, in the last bullet, there's reference made during public comment to non-required existing plantings in the easement. But though that existing vegetation is independent of the development order.
What did the ADD envision for that property?
I think just an amenity. Going back,
No descriptor of,
not to my knowledge. someone else may have more information, but there was no description to my knowledge. As we started going through this, we started talking about what could be there, and there was amenity.
Adam, do you have the ADD plan handy?
Up on the screen? Is that what you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, we could, if we could,
This plan?
yes.
Existing resort area.
It allowed uses to be moved anywhere.
So where's the Beach House Restaurant on this map?
Right here.
Might want to let Mark get up. Mark is going to testify to this.
The setback, yes. From an ADD standpoint, the bulk of the resort area is that vertical hatch that is generalized resort area. The land use limitations really are focused around the commercial 5 acres on the Captiva Drive frontage, but you can see the vast majority of the resort is just that generalized resort.
There was a note.
Yeah, I would
Your need for the if I could just, your need for the deviation that you've sought there is because under the existing development approvals, you were not required to put a buffer, and you only had to set back 10 feet.
Correct.
And so in the new approvals,
We would, in order to have no buffer, the setback would have to be 20 feet. We're well in excess of that, but that would be the minimum standard under the ADD to eliminate the buffer along that property line.
so now you're seeking a rezoning, and you're asking me to recognize that as a pre-existing condition because the beach house has now been constructed.
In our revised conditions, and as will be noted in the next few slides, we've eliminated that deviation request. So we do have a vested development order for what's being constructed per the development order plans with no buffer in that location. We are proposing some supplemental plannings, as you're going to hear about momentarily. And in the future, if this, if it is damaged more than 50%, if it has to be constructed or we elect to redevelop that property, we will comply with the Land Development Code, Chapter 10416, which would be a C or F buffer in that location. So we are, in your revised conditions, we've dropped the deviation request along that property line.
And you're addressing something in conditions?
Yes, we have that Christian Andrea is going to be presenting right after Carl.
Hours of operation, amplified sound, other things to enhance compatibility?
Yes.
Okay, well, I look forward to that.
And it may help to understand that last time we were in front of you talking about this, there was a different development order approval. It's been amended since then to be
Okay.
consistent with what we're talking about. So you may not have visualized that step that we just took.
Okay,
And and the others in the team will go through the changes.
excellent. Just so that I understand, the takeaway from your testimony is what exactly?
Yeah, I'll testify for you.
Just touching on the items, why there's no parking, why there's no buffer, why the existing vegetation isn't required, because those things were discussed at last time we discussed this item. The development order has since been amended to clean those up.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to note for the record, under the ADD on page 16, it does indicate that the final phases of development as set forth in the ADD would be upgrading of resort service facilities and improvement to guest facilities, which included amenities. So it provided for great flexibility as to their locations.
I'm more concerned with achieving compatibility than the details of,
Okay.
Good afternoon, Christian Andrea, landscape architect with Architectural Land Design. This is a rendered version of the approved development order landscape plans, and this is reflecting, is it a point or two?
The red button.
There we go. So this is the The buffer here that is not required as part of the ADD, but this reflects all the existing trees that are there and to remain. In addition, this plan has an additional strip of landscape here and here that is 5 feet wide that's been added from the previous plan that you saw. There are 12 trees proposed along this corridor here, 9 here, and then 3 here, along with additional landscape in that area. In addition to that, a wall is being proposed here that is 8 feet tall as measured from the deck, but it's 4 foot of masonry wall with 4 foot of louver panels above that. And then in addition, you can see the landscape now basically wraps all 4 sides of the building, not completely, but there's at least a 5 foot strip that covers, I don't know what percentage that is, but probably 2/3, if not 3/4 of the perimeter. The next slide shows the wall that's proposed. So this is a cross section through the wall. So from inside the deck's about 2 feet or 2.5 feet, I think, above the ground. Then there's the 4 foot masonry wall, and then the 4 foot louvered panels that's above that. And then on this side here is where that dense landscape would occur. This is a view from the, sorry, I've got blurry vision. I think that says from the south. Yeah, it's from the south property line looking back at it. So the wall's a little taller than 4 feet here. So it's between 8 and, let's see, that would be 10 feet-ish. And then when you're inside the patio looking to the south, you can see the 4 foot wall there with the louvered panels on top. I am happy to answer any of the questions you may have. If not, I'll have Mark come up and
Can
continue.
you spell your last name, please?
Andrea, A-N-D-R-E-A.
And you're an architect?
Landscape
Okay,
architect.
before you leave, the louvered panel, are you the one that can,
Mark will be better at that.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. Mark McLean, MHK Architecture. I'm a National Director, lead our Southwest Florida studio. I've presented to you in a preliminary, the preliminary submittal.
Okay, slow down.
Sorry? Okay.
Okay, Mark McLean.
Yep. MHK Architecture. I presented our original presentation to you. My credentials are on file with the submittal. Here to follow up on, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
So you're also an architect,
Yes, ma'am.
and you designed the original beach house?
My team designed this beach house. Yes, ma'am.
I'm ready for you.
Ready? So as we've been talking about, this is the property that we're looking at. It's the beach house that's under construction and the property to the south of it. So where everybody was trying to lay this out to you was the relationship of the two buildings. So as we look at the relationship of the two buildings, this red line represents the property line. To the face of our building, which is the entry that's there, that's the 30-foot separation. So from the property line to this entry, that's our 30-foot separation from the buildings, from the property line to our building. If we're greater than 20 feet in the ADD, then there's no requirement for a buffer on this property line. So that's where the separation is why there's no requirement for the buffer, is because we're 10 foot greater than the ADD requires.
But you're going to provide one.
We are providing one anyway. Yes, ma'am. So as we move from there, as I continue to move on this little roofed area here that I referred to as the 30-foot area, that's just the entrance to get into it. The building itself, the primary wall of the building, is back here along this line, and you'll see it in my next renderings, that primary wall is another 12.5 feet back. So from face of this house's wall to face of our building wall, there's a 42.5 foot separation between the two. It gets into the semantics of where things are measured from. So
Talking about the side of the building versus the overhang?
yes, ma'am. The side of the building, from the side of the building to the side of the building is greater than 42 feet. The setback is measured to the face of this building, which will show a little better in the renderings. The other thing we wanted to point out here is that our building is slightly over 29 feet tall, and the neighboring building is 42 feet tall. So we are also over 13 feet short, or nearly 13 feet shorter than the adjacent building. So as I move into this slide here, this will kind of define some of the things that we've done. So as we've cleaned up the pedestrian walkway through here, again, from the face of this column to the property line is the 30-foot measured requirement. Then from the face of this building to the property line, we're 42.5 feet. What we've done with this in the new development order that you haven't seen yet was we created this 5-foot landscape buffer that runs through here to increase the compatibility of it. Back here in the rear area where the outdoor dining is, that's where we've added the wall that Christian had referred to, which shows up a little better in my next slides. So as we move to the next slides and we're down on the beach looking back at the beach house, you can see how this wall presents itself here. The dining is on this side, the wall is on this side. This rendering is a little bit off. The floor of this outdoor dining is actually about 30 inches above the sand. So when you're on this side of the wall, you would have the 4-foot wall plus 30 inches. So you'd be 6.5 feet. Like if this person's walking down this pedestrian walkway, there's 6.5 feet of concrete wall that would separate you from that, and then it's all planted out to kind of bury the wall. Then we put 4 feet of louver on top of that wall. If I move to the next slide, it kind of looks as you move around to the beach looking back at the wall. So somebody sitting at the table at this side, there's still 4 feet of wall here. So if they're sitting at a chair, the wall's still about the top of your head or maybe a little bit higher when you're sitting at a chair. So that should knock down most of the sound coming off of the outdoor dining area. And then the louver is, we wanted to be decorative once we come up out of the top of the landscaping and out of the top of the trees. We just didn't want a 8-foot tall concrete wall there. So we put the louvers in it to be decorative and more compatible with the rest of the restaurant. And that's my presentation on the beach house, if you have any questions.
It's my understanding that those louvers are more than just decorative. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're designed to be sound dampening.
There are sound dampening blades within them. So the blades have an aluminum thickness to it, and they have an insulation within them. The manufacturer specification on it says that it will knock down 80% of sound transmission going through that wall.
Thank you.
Any questions? We'll turn this back over to Christian, I believe. Right, is this Christian again?
Or is it you?
Yeah, no, that's Christian again.
Sorry about that, I gotta pay attention. This is the water park area. This is the rendered version of the development order, the approved development order for the landscape plans. The focus here is the buffer along here and here. So this is indicated as a 6-foot wide buffer. We have a requirement of trees at a ratio of 5 per 100, so roughly every 20 feet are trees. I forgot what the exact mix is, but I believe there's 4 palm trees and the rest are the rest are canopy trees. And then there's a requirement for a 5-foot hedge with, to be maintained at 8-foot height at maturity. So it's a relatively complete and full buffer.
This is a condition of approval?
This is coming from our deviation, I guess, right?
Deviation and development.
And development order, yeah, and the development order, yes, I'm sorry.
All right, so that's the top of the photograph?
Yeah, that's where the focus was for this presentation, this portion here.
The closest condo units?
Correct, because they're a non-owned property, and that's what predicated the need for the buffer. Non-resort owned, I should say.
And this is at the south end of the resort?
This is at the south end. You drive in right through here as you come around. Actually, take my orange, yeah. So this is the south end as you come into the property.
What parcel is this on your master concept plan?
Parcel C, tract C.
Recreation. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mark McLean again, MHK Architecture. The first slide I'm going to present to you today for the south end is an image from pre-Hurricane Ian. So you can see from the pre-Ian development, earlier in the presentation, Sean had mentioned that this was the previous check-in building, and these tennis courts had existed in here. These were the properties that were in question that we were just mentioning that are outside of the development. So with this, we just wanted to illustrate the amount of density, the amount of buildings, everything that was in that space pre-Ian. So then if we move forward to where we are in our development today, or our development and our future development, the water park was the picture that Christian just reviewed and showed the buffer along here for the villas. And then what we're illustrating is where the new proposed hotel will be along this buffer. One of the things we want to talk about is there's been a lot of conversation about building height and how building height works. And in my original presentation, we had talked about whether we were at design flood elevation or base flood elevation or an elevation controlled by the construction control line or by the limb wall. But this entire property is in a standard A zone. So in the standard A zone, our building heights will be measured from DFE. But to eliminate some of that confusion as to where everything's measured from, even if we're in an AE7 or an AE8, there's still a reference point of 0. So 0 is always somewhere in the ground. It's back at a water level from the North American vertical datum. Everything comes from a 0. So what we wanted to do to simplify this for everybody is do some measurements from 0. So when we look at the tennis villas here, and we say it's 47.3 feet tall, that's from 0. So that's a reference height from 0, which you can see the building's only 43.6 from grade, but the grade can change, right? You can have a driveway that leads up to a building, or you can change a grade down to a pool deck. So what we're trying to do is level everything back out to 0 so we can simplify it for everybody. So if we measure from 0, the tennis villas are 47.3 adjacent to our new proposed hotel. As we move into that comparison, the building on the right is the tennis villas. So that's the 47 that we just mentioned. I think this says 47.6, the other one says 47.3. There's different villas there, and they're off by a few inches, again, because of just measurements that, you know, we've got someone with a laser trying to shoot the elevation of a building. So this one, whoops, I'm sorry. This one says 47.6, the other one said 47.3. If we bring everything back down to 0 and 0 everything out, our property is in a FEMA flood zone that's AE7. We have to add a foot to it for our base floor, which brings us to design flood elevation, which is BFE +1, which puts our base floor at 8. Going back to the original presentation that I did, we're allowed 45 feet in building height to the midpoint of the roof. The existing building, again, we measured the 47.6 back down to 0. If we come across to 0 and back up to our height, we're 56.83. So the difference between the existing building and our new building is slightly over 10 feet. When these numbers reconcile, there are buildings out there that are right at 8 feet. There are buildings out there that are at 10 feet. But anywhere that we're in this standard AE flood zone on the south end, this is kind of where we are at 10 feet. But if we break this down a little bit, there's over 4 feet here from their ground floor to where we're now mandated to be for our ground floor. So we can't put our ground floor down here at 3.7. We've learned through our presentation that FEMA flood says we have to be up here at 8. So that's 4 feet of the 10 feet right there. Also, this 45 feet is measured to the midpoint of the roof. The midpoint of the roof encourages a mansard style design, so you put all that mechanical equipment on the roof and protect it. It's a resiliency technique that they ask us to put the mechanical equipment on the roof so it's not getting flooded, and then screen it with the roof itself because the roof is hurricane rated. So that's where we get a few extra feet in height from the 45 feet, but it's all done in the name of resiliency. So if we take the 10-foot 2, we take the 3-foot 10 in additional resiliency height, the 4-foot in additional elevation height and resiliency, a little over 8 feet of the new height makes up our efforts to make the building more resilient out of the 10-foot total in the 2 different building heights. So we just wanted to slow everything down and see when we align all these buildings at 0, 0, we're not talking about a great elevation difference in height.
So is this 10-foot differential the greatest differential in the resort?
No, ma'am. As we discussed, if we're seaward of coastal construction control line or we're subject to the limb wall line, those could be greater differences because those are controlled by DEP. These are the ones that we can control in the standard AE zone. And I think the question that was brought to us was what was the comparison of the new hotel to the villas?
No, I wanted to know the difference between the tallest buildings on the resort and existing today and the potential height of the buildings that will be newly constructed.
I believe Alexis has some of that in her follow-up presentation. I had only done the south building because this was my
So
understanding.
this is the south area,
Yes, ma'am. So I threw one more slide in here that kind of shows the south area.
the former tennis villas and the
Yes,
hotel.
ma'am. So the tennis villas were right in here. Again, this is where the gate comes in. This is showing that the flood zone in here is the AE7. The purple area with this black dash line is your limb wall line that shows we're not subject to the limb wall down here because we're in this higher central portion of the island.
Okay, so in this particular area, there's a 10-foot differential.
Yes, ma'am.
Of which you're saying 8 can be derived from resiliency measures.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we go back to this comparison slide?
Certainly.
If the tennis villas were to be damaged by greater than 50% and they sought to rebuild, where would their starting point then be? Same as,
Yes, they would be the same as us. It just depends. If you got out here to Bayside Villas and this line got surveyed accurately and they were subject to limb wall, they could technically be taller than us. But for now, no, the tennis villas are right here. They would be equal to us at that point.
okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Bob will be 2 minutes. Okay. Our next speaker has 2 slides, so we could finish with them today, I think.
It's 4:02, so we're checking.
I'll go to 4:15, so.
Okay. We were told 4, so we don't want to,
Okay,
Get in
yeah,
trouble.
I just want to give Maria time to transfer all the
Okay.
recordings. We're covering a lot of ground, this is good.
Yes, it is.
Ready? Hi. For the record, my name is Bob Walter. I'm a 45-year hospitality professional, mostly in resort destinations. I've had direct oversight of 13 different cities and locations in 3 countries throughout my career. And I know we've talked a lot about hurricanes. I've dealt with 14 hurricanes in the resorts that I worked with. So I don't know if I'm like Dan, but I like to consider myself a hurricane expert.
Savvy.
Yeah, I'm hurricane savvy. And if I may, my resume.
Okay, thank you.
Little personal aspect of my relationship with South Seas. I began vacationing at South Seas in the mid-2000s. I worked for Maristar Hospitality, who was the owner of the resort during Charlie. Plantation Development, the original developer, sold it to Maristar, who then sold it to Blackstone Group, who then sold it to the current owner applicant. So I've been at the resort as a guest from the early 2000s. In January of 2013, I moved to Captiva from Tampa, and I was the managing director of the resort through, from 2013 to 2021. And when the applicant purchased the resort at that point in time, I became the owner's representative, still working with the resort and the applicant, but not running the day-to-day operations. Mr. Farrell runs the day-to-day operations. If I could just add one more comment to the hurricane. The hurricane plan that the resort has is probably one of the most complex and well-done hurricane plans I've ever seen in my career. And frankly, I've used it at 5 or 6 other resorts around the country as an example of how to do it right. So it's an excellent plan that they speak of. I want to talk a little bit today about who we are in the community and communications for the last year. Our beautiful beaches attract guests and protect Captiva. Post-Hurricane Ian, Aptum, who is the CEPD, which is the Captiva Erosion Prevention District's nourishment consultant, stated that the consistent nourishment and dune restoration clearly limited the impact of the storm compared to the other areas impacted like Fort Myers Beach. We're a special district, the Captiva Erosion Prevention District, and we have the ability to tax and nourish the beaches every 8 to 10 years, and that's what we do. And the fact that we do that as a community saved a lot of homes during these hurricanes because we had the dunes up 13 to 15 feet, and even though we had surge, it was nothing near like you see in Fort Myers Beach and some other areas that were highly impacted by surge. Let me step back for a second. I sat on the board of the Captiva Community Panel, which you've heard of, from 2013 to 2023. I've been sitting on the board of the Captiva Erosion Prevention District from 2013 to present, and I'm also a member of the Captiva Civic Association. A little history, a little factoid that not a lot of people know. The CPD has a parking lot called Allison Hagerup. Allison Hagerup Beach. It's a public parking lot at the end of Captiva Drive, and where the public can come park, go to the beach, and there's a small section of public beach there. That land, except for one small parcel, is actually owned by the applicant. And it has an easement that the applicant has given to the county and the CEPD to use that space for parking. And what's really important to note there is those revenues that are collected from parking are reserved, and then they're used when the beach nourishment is done to offset the cost to Captivians. So example, 2021, that parking lot generated $814,000 in revenue. Over an 8-year period, on or about $6.5 million. Now, there are CEPD expenses, operation expenses that come out of that, but what's left over as reserves pays down the nourishment before the apportionment goes to Captivians. So it's a big deal that this parking lot exists so we can do the beach parking, protect our beaches, and at the same time save taxpayers a boatload of money in their nourishments. A couple other things, we provide emergency access, some of these you've heard already, to the North Beaches for Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Captiva Fire District. We also provide MENA space for the marine operations at no charge to both Captiva Fire. I'm sorry, I'm one of those, I apologize. Marine operations at no charge for both Captiva Fire and Lee County Sheriff's. We also provide Lee County Sheriff's Office space for space of operations at Captiva at no charge. We also supply training facilities for the fire district and emergency airlift operations. The resort's land is used for airlift operations when needed. And thankfully, it's probably happened in my 12 years 4 times, I think.
You're speaking of this parking area.
No, for the emergency airlift, we use sections of the golf course, rec island, any open land that we have, closer to the accident, more importantly, since we are the largest landowner in Captiva. This was mentioned earlier. I think Mr. Valenstein spoke of it. We executed and funded a resiliency study for all of Captiva, not just South Seas. And I'd like to show you that we shared that as soon as we got it with the Captiva Community Panel and the Captiva Erosion Prevention District. Open communication. I think this is probably the most important slide to talk about. It talks about what we've done and how we've done it as far as the largest landowner in communicating to the owners within the resort and owners within Captiva. Prior to Hurricane Ian, we hold monthly president's calls in just an open forum, talk about what's working, what's not working. There's no master association. I think we spoke to that in a previous meeting. So we held monthly calls on a regular basis, and we communicated openly. After Hurricane Ian, we held daily calls. I mean, we couldn't get back. We got back on the island. We had boats and that sort of thing, but the causeway was washed out, and a lot of owners are not there. I mean, they're at homes in Michigan and Chicago and that sort of thing. Then we held four weekly calls, and then begin in November of 22, we went back to our HOA president calls, and we discussed recovery, restoration, and planning to rebuild and restore the resort. It became very evident in early 2023 that the discussions we were having with the presidents were not filtering down to the owners. We had many owners call us and say, hey, listen, what's going on here? Well, we just had a president's call. Weren't you involved in that? Did anybody say, no, nobody said. Granted, some presidents were very good at it, but most weren't. So we made a conscious decision in mid-2023 to move our president calls to all owner calls in July. There have been a total of 26 calls. To start in July of 2023, we held 6 HOA calls. And those HOA calls were specific to Lands End, Beach Villas, because we wanted to speak specifically what their issues were and their concerns. And this happened to coincide at the exact same time when the county had gone to the Board of County Commissioners and asked for the rezoning out there. So we were very conscious of making sure that everybody knew from our perspective what was going on, what we were doing, and our involvement in discussing things with the county and homeowners. In August of 2023, we began monthly calls. We've continued with those monthly calls to this date. We cover resort operations, sales and marketing, owner relations, hurricane recovery efforts, and there's a huge section on South Seas Build Back and Future amenities. I mean, our slide deck right now is about 140 slides on a monthly basis that we go through for owners. The meetings are recorded and made available to all owners on our community website, on our South Seas page. From July of 23 to March of 2025, we've had 3,000 participants on those calls. 685 video review downloads from Zoom alone, not counting individuals that went to our site, South Seas. And we addressed 122 separate questions. We had 172 individual owner meetings that followed up on some of those questions, et cetera, et cetera. So we've made it an unbelievable effort to communicate on a regular basis our development, our rezoning efforts, all the things you spoke of height and squeeze and everything. We've talked about all those things on all these calls since 2023. If I may, I'd like to present, this is the data analytics from those calls. To show the participants, the number of participants. And those were my quick 2 slides.
That's it, you're done?
Yep.
You only had the one exhibit?
Yes.
And his resume, I think he gave you.
Oh, yes, my
And his
resume.
resume, that's right. I've already lost it.
I
Here
have
it
all
is.
this.
There it is. Go ahead.
Did you have any questions, Madam?
I do not. Thank you. This is very informative.
Bob, I think Bob, who testified at the end of the second day, who was the president, and Mr. Suarez, who was the president, both lamented that there was no communication. Since you've been involved with this, in your opinion, have you worked diligently to communicate with all the owners?
Absolutely.
And I know you said you were there when Charlie was there, so do you know whether or not the trolleys have actually been used to evacuate people from the resort to the mainland?
Yes, for Charlie, we used the trolleys to evacuate, all the guests were evacuated. But at that time, back in 2004, we had employee housing. So the team members that worked and lived in housing at the time were all transported to the Hertz Arena
Okay,
and sheltered, and that EC member stayed with them.
okay. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to conclude for today, and we'll resume on April 18 at 9 a.m. And we'll be still in the applicant's rebuttal portion of the hearing. Our hope is to conclude that on that day.
As
and
do
then
we.
Go to staff, and then possibly conclude the hearing.